saying.
Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, Professor Judith Idor-Barmel-Schwartz, Director of the Finkler Institute of Holocaust Research, dear Poland Forum members. I'm happy to open our first meeting today for the year 2023. This year, we will have 4 meetings, very interesting Zoom meetings. I sent you the dates, and soon I will send you the subjects. I hope that next time you can open it immediately, because I sent it many times, and maybe when you try to be so perfect, so never is perfect. So I hope that more people will join us. I want to remind the members who are working on their articles for our book. Deadline for sending your articles is the 1st of March. Only 5,000 words, including footnotes. It's really so difficult, but I hope that everyone will do it and will be on time. So I would like to invite Professor Judith Idor-Barmel-Schwartz to open our first Zoom meeting for this year. Judith.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Leah. And thank you, Jakob, for agreeing to give the first lecture in our series. I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to tell everyone that this forum exists because of Leah. She does all the work. She is the initiator. She is incredible. I think that when it comes to forums, the Poland Forum has become an example of what a forum should be. Everybody says, so how should we work? And I say, go look at what happens in the Poland Forum, because that's how a forum should be. Regarding what Leah said about the books, remember, not only 5,000 words, it's more than that. You have to submit an abstract. You have to submit keywords. The abstract should be between 100 to 200 words. It should be at the beginning of the article. In a separate document, please send us bios. You have already sent us biographies, but I want a new one of up to 150 words, no more than that. And at a certain point, after we go through the articles, then we're going to ask you for index words, but you have a lot of time for that, because that's only going to be with the final articles. And we will send everybody an email once again about all this information so that it can be done correctly. I'm not going to take up your time. I'm looking forward very much to hearing what's going to be going on in the Poland Forum. We have several meetings set up already for this coming year, and we're recording them. For those of you who have not been able to join us, you'll be able to hear it again on recording. And I won't use up Jakob's time. So thank you very much. And may we have a successful forum meeting, a successful book, and a successful forum in general. Once again, all thanks to Leah. Without her, this forum could not exist.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate so much your kind words, and you are my inspiration, you know. So everything also belongs to you, and thank you for supporting me in everything, in every idea and everything in this way of forum. Thank you.
Just for you to know, I'm here. When I put on the picture, I can hear you, but I'm going back and forth because I have a second Zoom going on my phone. So I'm here and I'm listening.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to invite our lecturer, Dr. Flakov, Poland Forum member, and a very interesting person, and is an excellent researcher. He holds a BA and MA in Social Science and Security Studies from Tel Aviv University and a PhD in History from the same institution. Flakov is the author of 2 books, Forest Spies, The Intelligence Activity of Soviet Partisans, 1941 until 1945. The second book that today he will talk about it is Between Hitler and Churchill, 2 Jewish agents and the effort made by the British intelligence to prevent secret Polish Nazi collusion. So we are looking forward to your lecture today about this subject. Dr. Flakov is also co-author of the book Fighters Across Frontiers, Transnational Resistance in Europe, 1936 until 1948. Flakov contribution to the scholarly research of Polish history includes many aspects. Flakov lectures are on World War II, Polish geopolitical, political, military, and intelligence aspect in Israel and abroad. The subject of his lecture today is the 80th anniversary of the almost forgotten Mikoczynski-Sharkiewicz affair. Did it affect the course of World War II? Thank you, Yaakov, and the floor is yours.
And thank you, Leah, so much. Thank you also, Professor Schwartz, for having me here today. I'm very excited, I have to admit, since this is, I think, the first time that I will present this topic in English, and especially to my Polish colleagues. Although I already had some conversations with my Polish colleagues about this specific subject and my research, but this is the first time to present it, the entire case here. So let's start. Since I was told right now by Leah that I have only about half an hour, I will try to make it very, very briefly. So we will leave many, many questions and subjects aside, and later on I could elaborate on them. So this journey, research journey of mine, started about 10 years ago, a decade ago, when I happened to the Warsaw airport and bought this very interesting book, popular book written by a colleague of mine, Sławomir Kopier, and it tells the story about the Polish elites in immigration, in exile during the World War II. And at some place, I found a very interesting description of a person called Samson Mikoczynski, who was presented as a rescuer of prominent Polish persons, wives and kids of the Polish leaders in exile. And I was completely fascinated by this story. And it was completely unusual. How could someone who was by himself a Jew, a Polish Jew, not only to be able to get out from occupied Poland, occupied by the Nazis, but also to rescue other persons, to bring them over to France. And since Kopier described his affair, Mikoczynski's affair, only very briefly, I decided to try to dig in and to find more about this story. So throughout the years, I moved from between different archives. I was a visiting research fellow at the USHMM, which is the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, 4 years ago. So I also spent some time in trying to find there some materials related to Mikoczynski, and I did it. I found a very interesting materials there. And then also in this very nice small Brooklyn archive in New York, which is called the Pilsudski Institute. Also there I found, as you can see here, this file, personal file, only tiny, very small, but still a very interesting one about a Mikoczynski affair. And later on also, of course, I couldn't miss this very important and very famous place, the Polish Institute and Sikorsky Museum, which possesses a very nice collection of documents, of course, related to this specific period of time, but also multiple documents related to Mikoczynski and his entire affair. And of course, last but not least, this very important institution, the National Archives in Kew Gardens near London, which actually has two or even more very important intelligence files of all the Polish heroes of this story. These files were actually disclosed by the British authorities about 20 years ago. And I suppose that I was one of the first readers of those files. and they do contain a huge and very fruitful information, very helpful information about Mikichinsky and his abductor and interrogator. We will mention him later, Mr. Edward Shapiro Shorkevich, and also about Mikichinsky's patron, Minister Stanislav Kot. So I think by this stage, uh, the research, it is not completed until today, but the picture of the entire story became much clearer to me. First of all, a part of finding the information about the rescue trips to occupied Poland made or performed by Mikichinsky in late 1939 and early 1940, I also found a fascinating piece of information related to his other activities in the region during this period of time. And he was active until the beginning of 1941, when he was, and as I will tell you later, he was abducted or kidnapped by the British and the Polish a military intelligence called Dvojka. Uh, and it appeared that he also was involved in a very strange, very interesting affair, the attempt by, most likely, but by his patron, Stanislav Kot, the minister Stanislav Kot, who was right hand of Sikorsky, and by himself a very important person in the Polish government in exile. He was the minister of the interior, and he had his own security and intelligence networks spread across the occupied continent, of course in occupied Poland, but also in other countries like Romania, or like Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, also Turkey, and in the British Mandate Palestine. So he probably was trying to establish contact with the Nazi German ambassador in Turkey, in Ankara, Franz von Papen. And here, for example, first of all, I was trying to gather as much information as possible, and also the things which were already written about this affair. So I bought these two books written by my Polish colleagues, Roman Buczek and Władysław Michniewicz. Michniewicz by himself was a military intelligence officer in the Middle East during World War II. And he wrote a very interesting book about what he called Operation Haifa, the abduction of Mr. Mikichinsky in Turkey. So they didn't mention this specific point, this contact made by him with Franz von Papen. So I was looking for more information about this. And one of the things that I found, you can see it here, but there are more, much more, but this one is very clear. As you can see here in Polish, Mikichiński prowadzi tutaj ostatnią rozmowę z Papenem. So the Polish representatives who were not involved in these contacts, specifically the Płacówka, which is a post of the Polish military intelligence in Ankara, they were trying to forewarn their superiors in London by this time that this guy is contacting here in Turkey the Germans. And also the British, when they discovered the entire plot, these contacts, they started to gather through intelligence channels information about these contacts. And also by different occasions, they mentioned these contacts. For example, here on the left, they were convinced that Mikichiński was actually sent by the minister Kot to try to approach both the Germans and the Soviets in Turkey, and for an unknown purpose. And on the right also, you can see another British intelligence document which mentions contacts not only of Mikichinsky, but also of, they call them the people of Kot, since he had a quite, as I said, widespread network of his people, his representatives in Romania, Bulgaria, and also in Turkey. So these guys, and specifically Jerzy Kurziusz, who was his representative of the Ministry of Interior in Turkey, their contacts with different Germans, including von Papen. And the second stage is, or the second very interesting point, relates to the story or to the development of this affair after the abduction of Mikichinsky in Turkey in January of 1941 by the British and by the representative of the Polish military intelligence, Lieutenant Edward Szarkiewicz. I will dedicate him a few words a bit later. And it appears that he was, this specific Szarkiewicz, he was brought by the British, specifically by the MI5, the British counterintelligence, to England about half a year after the abduction and the disappearance of Mikichinsky. He probably was killed by the same Szarkiewicz in here in Israel, in Palestine, in mid 1941, about half a year after the abduction. And this guy Szarkiewicz, who was most likely recruited by the MI5 as a full agent, intelligence agent, he was brought to London, and they together, and the patron of Szarkiewicz, General Isidor Madelsky, who by this time was the second and later on the first deputy of the Minister of the Military Affairs in the Polish government in exile. So they were trying actually to put the military, the Polish military counterintelligence, and through it also the entire Polish military apparatus under a very tight control of the UK, of the British. So this was a prolongation, the continuation of the Mikichinsky affair. And this was the reason for me calling this entire story the mutual, kind of mutual affair, Mikichinsky and Szarkiewicz affair, since as far as I understand now, the British by themselves, they understood this story as an entire plot, as an interconnected parts of the entire plot. So let's move, since I understand I have very little time, just a few words about Samson Mikichinsky, who was codenamed by his patron, Minister Lis. It was his nickname in the internal Polish correspondence. And he was born in the late 19th century in a small village called, or town called Boczki in eastern Poland until today. And as far as I understand today, his family, they spoke Polish, Russian, and of course Yiddish. And later on, he was sent by his family, by his parents, to study, to be a lawyer, study this profession in Moscow, in Moscow University, which was kind of unique for Jews, Jewish boys and girls during this period of time. And later on, during the First World War, he was recruited as a young officer into the Tsarist army. He fought on the front, and after the revolution, he joined the so-called army of Denikin, and escaped later through probably Crimea, escaped to Berlin, then to Paris, and in the late 20s, he came back to Poland and became a businessman. Again, without too much details, but he was involved at some stage in the mid of the 30s. He became involved in the business of tourism and even bought a very well-known tourist firm by this time called Pol Tour. And using this Pol Tour firm here after the Nazis came to power in Germany, and as all of us, we know, they started to, from the expulsion of the Jews from the Reich, from the Third Reich. So, and here, this very important, very well-known Zbonchen affair. So almost 17,000 Polish or former Polish citizens of Jewish origin were expelled to the Polish border and kept there. So he was trying, by using his ties, by this time, very good ties in the Ministry of the Interior in Poland, to assist at least some of them who could pay him and pay to deliver the money for bribes for different Polish authorities in Warsaw. So he was very deeply involved in this affair by this time. And later on, we already meet him in the after a attack or invasion of Poland by the Nazis. He escaped to via the Baltic states and Sweden, escaped to France, followed by this young lady called Irina Szarska-Potocka. As far as I understand, he was a mode queen of Poland before World War II, and they both arrived to Paris. And by this time, he was a very rich man, and he loved a good time, a good life, and good time, of course, very much. And he placed himself in this very well-known Paris hotel called Majestic, and he almost immediately contacted the Polish authorities. By this time, he also bought or somehow arranged to himself a passport, a Chilean passport, and he was a real full representative or diplomat of the Chilean government in Poland and in the region. So he proposed, he met Mr. Sikorski and General Sosnkowski. In this place specifically, I visited this Hotel Regina, the place of the Polish general staff during the first year of after the downfall of the Polish state and before they moved to England. So for about a year, the general staff of the Polish Republic in exile actually sat here in this place. So Mikuchiński met these two persons and proposed them to go to Poland and to help them, to assist them in bringing all their money and letters, correspondence to the underground, the tiny underground, which by this time was being established in Poland, and also to contact their families. And surprisingly and amazingly, they agreed also to give them messages, messages to their relatives in occupied Poland. And he went there. And also, surprisingly, he was able to establish his office, permanent office, in this specific house in Ulica Frascati, the street Frascati, in the center of Warsaw, just next to the, I think, to the president's office, today's president's office of the Polish Republic. And from there, he managed to contact both the underground and the relatives of the Polish senior figures, again acting under this nickname Lis, given to him by Stanislav Kot, who used the nickname Tigris. And among the persons who managed to rescue from Poland were also Zofia, the daughter of Sikorski, and also his wife, Sikorsky's wife, so, and many others like the wife of Pukovnik Gano, who later on was or became the head of the Dvuyka of the Polish military intelligence. So here again, you can see this house, which I photographed just a couple of months ago. And the rumors arose almost immediately that he was doing this using the help or the assistance of the German or Nazi military intelligence. Actually, he did contact quite frequently the post of Abwehr located in Breslau, by this time or later Polish Wrocław. And it is very likely he later on, he will claim that he paid actually the German officers. He met them already before the war. And during this Bonchen affair, for example, they were already, they had these ties. But the possibility, it is very likely that the head of the Abwehr, Wilhelm Canaris by himself, was actually involved personally in this affair, since on some occasions, some persons whom Mikiciński rescued from Warsaw, they went to France through Berlin and were met them by the representatives of the Abwehr, again, the military intelligence of the Third Reich. So it is very likely, and I elaborate this topic in my book, this possibility of the involvement of personal involvement of Canaris in this affair. Never mind, in May 1940, for these very unique and very successful trips to occupy Poland. By the way, he also delivered money to our colleagues in the Jagiellonian University, for example, the colleagues of Professor Kot. So he was awarded, Mikiciński was awarded this very prestigious order of the Polish state called Polonia Restituta. And it was announced in the Polish press in exile that he was awarded by this order. He also started to act vis-a-vis Poland through Bulgaria and of course through Romania, especially for Romania. And here you can see the embassy, a Polish embassy in Bucharest. It is the same place, the same building where the Polish embassy is located today. So he contacted, and he contacted also the Polish diplomat, very well-known, very professional diplomat, Adam Tarnowski, who was the Polish ambassador in Bulgaria. And he had very good contacts with his local Bulgarian colleagues. And together, they also contacted the Polish underground. They delivered money and correspondence. They rescued people, Polish people and the Jewish people, Jewish citizens of Poland, via Bulgaria and Bucharest, together with Mikiciński, to Turkey and other places. All of them, as you can see here, all of them were suspected by the British and also by Dvuyka, by the Polish military intelligence, of being Nazi spies. But today we know that they were not actually, and all of them, all the Bulgarian side of the story, all of them were recognized later by the Bulgarian authorities as heroes who contributed a lot to the anti-Nazi resistance in their country, in Poland, in rescuing the Jewish citizens of Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania. But I will skip this part of the story. The attempts, the concurrent attempts by the Nazis, by Berlin, by Hitler himself, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to propose a kind of peace deal, firstly and foremostly to the British, but also at some stages also to the Polish government and exile. And we have a series of attempts by von Papen sitting, as I said, in Turkey and in other places. For example, a very well-known person, Jerzy Władysław Giedroyc, mentioned in his memories an attempt by some representative of the Germans to contact him in Bucharest and to talk about the possibility of establishing of a kind of a Polish puppet government in Warsaw. And also here we have a positive report by the British intelligence about the contact made by Miroslav Arciszewski, a special envoy for political refugees in Romania, who was also sent by Professor Kot to Bucharest. He also was approached by the Nazis, one of the Abwehr representatives in Bucharest, in order, as you can see here, the exception from the British intelligence report, to discuss the possibilities of forming a puppet Polish government in occupied Poland. So what happens, I don't know how much time do I have, but what happens concurrently in London in
You have more 10 minutes, Yaakov.
Okay, so I will
12
try
minutes.
to make my best. As far as I can see in the British and also in the Polish sources, the Polish government in exile after they came to London, being invited by Churchill himself, they quite soon discovered that behind the scenes, without their knowledge, the British, the Churchill himself, they were trying to contact firstly the Germans. They accepted different envoys sent by Berlin. For example, this guy called Birger Dalerus. He is a very well-known dispatcher who came to Britain, to the UK, multiple times to try to convince the British to answer the German proposal. But there was a series of others whom I describe in detail in my book. So the Polish government, using diplomatic and also intelligence tools, became aware of these contacts, and even more so the attempt by Churchill to convince Stalin, the Soviet leader, to join him in a kind of anti-Nazi deal. And Churchill was quite openly proposing to Stalin Eastern Poland in exchange. So the Poles were frustrated by this revelation. As you can see here, Churchill was using them in the military field for fighting for over the channel for Britain. He was using him to legitimize the continuation of the war, but he didn't want them to interfere in his foreign affairs, in his contacts with mostly with the Soviet Union. So there arose voices in the Polish diaspora, and at times very prominent voices, like this one of Major Laskowski, who fought in France and remained in resistance, and later on was caught by the Gestapo and sent to one of the concentration camps. So in the mid 40, I think, he spoke to one of the Polish diplomats in Vichy, France, and he claimed clearly, plainly, that in this situation, we at least should try to contact also the Germans, since they are proposing something that could be real, and at least let's try to listen to them. And probably after this initial contact with Arciszewski in Bucharest, Kot, and this is my guess, okay, since we do not possess exact information on this specific point on the timeline, but we know for sure that Mikuchiński relocates himself from Bucharest to Turkey, to Istanbul. He actually lives here in this Park Hotel in Istanbul, and in the European part of the city. And while sitting here, he is contacting quite frequently the ambassador von Papen, and they are talking about something which, as I showed you earlier, was described by the Polish diplomats and the Dvojka representatives in Ankara as a kind of negotiation. And also the British intelligence, as you can see here, they became quite quickly became aware of these contacts, and they also were very, very suspicious since they understood that he is contacting Germans and he's talking to von Papen, and this revelation quite frequently led both of them, the British intelligence and the Dvojka, the Polish military intelligence, led them to promote, to arrange a kind of operation which will abduct, kidnap the main hero of the story, Mikichinsky, and will bring him to the Akko or Accra prison here in Israel or in Palestine. Just a few words about this discrepancy, apparent discrepancy, since actually the guy who is sending Mikichinsky to contact von Papen was a very senior Polish figure on the one hand. On the other hand, the guys who were trying to arrest him, to kidnap him, were the representatives of the Polish military intelligence. And here we must mention the split, a very serious split within the Polish elite in exile. And actually the two camps, just two words since we have no time, but there was a very serious split between Sikorsky's government and the camp which was called Sanacja. The guys who were the admirers of the previous pre-war government, Polish government. So both General Kazimierz Sosnkowski and the head of the Polish military intelligence, they belonged to this camp, and this was the reason for the Polish military intelligence Dvojka to approach the British, to contact them, to try to arrange together a kind of plot, a kind of plan, how to abduct Mikichinsky, how to stop his contacts with von Papen in Turkey, in Istanbul. And here you can see one of the documents related to this arrangement. They were trying firstly to arrange a kind of small boat which will take Mikichinsky, already kidnapped, from Turkey to someplace, and later on they decided on Palestine. But in the end of the process, they decided to bring over to Turkey a small plane, and they kidnapped him, as I said, in mid-January 1941, here at this place, which is called the Taksim Square in Istanbul. Then in the 40s, in the early 40s and today, very important place. And here you can also see excerptions of different reports written by the Polish authorities and the British authorities about the entire operation. So here, for example, another report by the Polish embassy in Ankara about the disappearance. They didn't know about the operation. The entire story was covered and kept very secret by the intelligence bodies, the Polish and the British ones. By the way, there were much more than one intelligence British body involved in this story. But here I found a report by the embassy in Ankara to London about the disappearance of Mikichinsky. And here you can see a series. This became a kind of big story by this time. reported by different newspapers, local ones, and also foreign American and British newspapers, and even the Russians managed somehow to learn about the story and report it in Moscow. So he was brought up by, most likely by a small boat plane to Palestine. And it is very interesting that in different intelligence sources, we can see that this operation was described or regarded by the British, by the MI5 and other bodies as one of the biggest successes of the British intelligence in the region by this time. And a very interesting fact that I've discovered that the pilot, who by the way was a nobleman, British nobleman, related to the British royal family, distant relation. So he was awarded just a month after the abduction, he was awarded this Special Royal Air Force Cross, which is one of the most prestigious, most prestigious awards of this kind during the war, during World War II, and I think until today. So Mikichinsky was kept here in this place, interrogated by both British and Dvuyka, especially by Sharkevich. And he didn't betray his patron, Kot. He didn't provide the British and Sharkevich much information about this affair. And finally, somewhere in mid-1941, he just disappeared. And I was trying to discover possible British reports on his disappearance. And they only mentioned that Sharkevich handled the entire story in a very good manner, in a very successful manner. And there were many rumors in the Polish milieu, in the UK and in other places, in the US, for example, that Sharkevich just killed him. He killed Mikichinsky near the prison, and he managed to hide somehow the body, etc., etc. So in the few minutes that I still probably have, I just would like to mention here, by the way, we can see his village where Mikichinsky was born, the same Bochki village, which I mentioned earlier. And Minister Kot sent a bit later as an ambassador to Moscow, and then as a minister here for a while to Palestine, to Israel, actually, when he understood finally that he was trying, by the way, to rescue Mikichinsky, to find his whereabouts and to rescue him, and he failed. But when he came to Palestine, to Jerusalem, and he was told, by the consul general of Poland in Jerusalem, that Mikichinsky actually was kidnapped and killed, he shouted, they have murdered a hero. There will be monuments erected in his memory in post-war Poland. This didn't happen, of course, and Poland was occupied after the war by the communists, by the Soviets, and it was an entirely different story. But the continuation of this story, of this specific affair, was no less interesting since, as I already said, the British, deeply impressed or highly impressed by the conduct of Sharkevich in the frame of this Mikichinsky affair, he brought him over to London, as you can see here. And here we have an example. Hopefully you will be able to read this, but this is a kind of conversation between Sharkevich and the senior figures in the MI5 in London after he's coming to London in late 1941. And here we can understand that by this time he was already providing the British, the MI5, with a very precise and secret information about his superiors in Dvuyka, in the Polish military intelligence. So I conclude that by this time, he already acted as a full agent of the British intelligence. and together they were trying to rearrange, to reform the Polish military counterintelligence in order to be able to do what exactly, as I understood from their correspondence, which you can see also here, some examples, but there are much more than that, okay? So they were trying to put General Isidor Modelsky in charge of the Polish military counterintelligence in order to be able, through him, to control the entire counterintelligence, military counterintelligence apparatus, and actually the entire military apparatus of the Polish government in exile. And they quite succeeded in doing this, in promoting this idea. And the reform in question was performed. And here, for example, and of course, Sharkevich was put in charge of this newly established apparatus. And in this specific, very unique, interesting case, as I discovered, he was responsible for giving or not giving the permission to Sikorsky to bring a big part of the Anders army, which came to Palestine in 1942. Sikorsky wanted to get a big part of this military force to bring it over to the UK, and the British opposed. And actually, Sharkevich, who was in charge for the counterintelligence in the military, in the Polish military, he gave them the reason. He told that there might be many Soviet agents, Soviet spies within this force, which just now came from the Soviet Union. So there is no possibility to check all of them in a short period of time. So the conclusion was they could not be brought to the UK. And this allowed the British to keep the entire military Anders force here in Palestine, in our region. And later on, and here I'm finishing, Leah, I know that I've already reached my limit, but as far, this is only guess, but as far as I understood, then Anders came to our region, to Palestine, to fight here in North Africa. Of course, the British decided to promote him as a kind of alternative to Sikorsky. And there are many signs, many mentionings of their rivalry of Sikorsky and Anders. And by this time, when this happened, they already didn't need the services of Mr. Modelsky. Modelsky was sent to his home. He actually was dismissed from the army until the end of, from the Polish army, until the end of the war. And Sikorsky, instead of him, promoted this guy called General Marian Kukel as the Minister of War in mid 1943, I think, or something like that, or actually in late 1942 already. And Sharkevich also was thrown out. He gained him enough people who hated him very much for his deeds. He was a very, very, very tough person and very problematic one. And his haters, rivalries in the Polish army did everything they could to throw him out. And actually, he tried to be relocated to Egypt and enter the English security services there in our region, in Egypt, in Cairo. But he actually was able to stay there only a short period of time, and was thrown out by this time by the British. And he came back to the UK, and he was trying to naturalize himself. And actually, he did obtain the British citizenship somewhere in the late 40s after the war. And died quite shortly afterwards. So he was, in the end of his life, he was quite a miserable person, betrayed by the British, and also very much, as I said, hated by his fellow countrymen. So this was the end of this story. And again, and of course, here this tragedy. One more point, and that's it. He was accused, Sharkevich, by his superior, and afterwards his kind of friend. He, that he actually took part in an attempt on the life of Sikorsky in July 1943. And as far as I discovered, by this time he wasn't, and he was accused of being a senior British security or intelligence officer, and which enabled his probable involvement in this attempt. But as far as I discovered during my research, by this time, when actually the plane of Sikorsky with his daughter crashed in Gibraltar, by this time Sharkevich wasn't in our region. Definitely, for sure, he still was in London, trying to get his pension from the Polish military authorities and to move to Egypt. So here, at least, I cleared him, this very controversial person. But here, I was able to clear his name from being accused of killing Mr. Sikorsky. That's it. I think I could continue since there are still many interesting sites in
We
this
have
story.
only 5 minutes for questions, and I'm
Oh,
sure
that's
that
it.
people would like to ask.
I think, to conclude, I think there was a possibility in late 1914 and the beginning 1941 to the Poles, probably in the described circumstances, to negotiate the Germans and probably to get something from them, since the Germans were eager to establish the thing that they called the Polnische Rechtsstaat. So by this time, the entire story of the Second World War could move in quite a different direction. And that's it. I know that I already talked too much.
Thank you very much for a fascinating lecture. It's really lights new hidden chapters that you expose to us, and I'm sure
It is too short, unfortunately, too short to be able to explain such a complicated matter.
yes, but we can read your book, you know. It's a recommendation. It's to read your book, and I think that people have questions. Yes.
I would like just to stress that I have a very full appreciation to the Polish government in exile. And I think that their attempt to probably to contact the Nazis was a kind of outcome of this betrayal by the British. They understood that they were betrayed by Churchill, and it was a kind of act of desperation, I think. That's it.
It's important that your book will be published in Poland. Okay, so would like to ask a question. It's silence.
I have no questions, but it was fascinating. I thank you very much, Yaakov, for a very, very interesting summary of an incident that is not so well known.
Yes, and how are people? Do you have reactions to your book already from Poland, other countries?
I was talking to some of them, try to describe it, but people, they must see the materials also. Yes, I used a lot of materials, a lot of sources in this research. Not only the Polish ones, but also I extensively used, as I tried to show you, the British sources, different sources, not only of the MI5, which is the British counterintelligence, but also all the SOE, Special Operations Executive, established by Churchill in 1940, to, as he said, to set Europe ablaze. So both of them, or these bodies, intelligence and security bodies, have been deeply involved in this affair. And also I went to see the German sources, for example, while trying to understand the background, the geopolitical and diplomatical background for this attempt. So it was needed to understand the roots of this movement, of the Polish movement towards the Germans, probably, okay? So, and then I discovered that also the Germans, they were trying, at least in the first year and half of the war, they were trying to reach a kind of arrangement about Poland, about the status of the Polish state, firstly and foremostly, as I said, with the British, but they definitely, positively, we can establish now, they were trying to contact different representatives of the Polish government in exile. And I think in this specific case, by the way, what I didn't tell you, the British intelligence, at some stage, they were convinced that Sikorski was fully aware of the entire movement. But in my book, I wrote that we still do not have a real proof. We have to handle the entire matter very carefully. Yeah. So I'm less convinced than the British intelligence was convinced by this time. Yeah. But still, we do know for sure that Mr. Kot was trying. He sent not only Mikicinski, but also the guy called Kurtziusz, whom I also mentioned already, and he was his representative in Turkey. He sent them to try probably to contact the Germans and to understand what exactly they meant by talking about the Polish Rechtsstaat, most likely in the territory of the general government. By this.
Thank you so much. Time is running and we are already finished our hour. I'm sure that people will ask you can send questions through mail. And we are here. This is the reason why we are in this forum, exploring new things, discussions, and I'm really happy to see many people today, 20 people of our forum. It's really wonderful. Thank you all for giving your time and being with us. And thank you, Judy.
Thank you again for the invitation to be with you today. Yeah, it was very important to me to try to present my research to you and my Polish colleagues. So hopefully the reactions will come later. Yes, and some of them hopefully will be even positive.
It's really complicated issue, you know. So
I completely understand this, but again, yes, my intention is not anti-Polish, definitely. Yeah, I appreciate very much the Polish government in exile, the Polish leaders of this time, and as I said, I think it was an act of desperation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so you have here in the chat, thanks, Yaakov. Could you send us the link to your new book? I would like to buy it. So people are...
Unfortunately, by now it is only in Hebrew. Oh. We are translating it now into English, and it will be published hopefully next year in the US. And probably at some stage also the Polish translation will come.
Yes, but if you have some materials that you would like to share with the members of the forum, maybe you can send us. Have a thank you. Your article in the book will be on this subject or another subject?
No, definitely not. It will be about the NKVD interrogation, Ukrainian NKVD interrogations of the Polish Jewish refugees who came to Ukraine.
Okay, yeah. So if you have something that you can send us that people can, you know, read more, so we appreciate it very much. Daniel put here a link. Yes, Daniel, welcome.
There's an English, sorry I came in late. There's an English summary And I would like to mention that when I sent it to my Polish colleagues, even without reading it, just reading, what's written here on the site, and maybe it's written on the back of your book, they did not understand. They did not accept it well. They wrote, I'm not mentioning the name, but a scholar in Poland, full professor, told me, sounds totally crazy. Sounds like someone else wrote me, sounds like Soviet propaganda that Poland and England are responsible for World War II. So I have the
completely so.
From reading that summary, they got the wrong impression.
Yeah, so of course, yeah, I completely agree with you. I will try to make another summary for the English version, and somehow to stress what I was trying to stress here today, that I'm definitely not against Poland. And it sounded crazy for me when I discovered those materials, and especially the British intelligence materials. So they are completely amazing. There is much more information there that could be and should be used in researches. So but I understand you corresponded very well.
You have a thank you very much for a very interesting lecture from Krzysztof Chubacek. People wrote you in the chat, and I think it's Witold. Do you have some articles at least? So you see that people are very interested in everything. Great lecture, thanks a lot. Swavimir, Anita, thank you very much. And Rivka, Haaretz newspaper had recent review of Yaakov's book. So you see that even people were silent, everyone was very interested, and we would like to hear more. So we can make a reaction to you. We can make a reaction, our even this and this, that we enjoyed so much from really from your lecture. So thank you. It's hard to say goodbye now, but time is running and people are probably very busy. So we will meet on March, and Avital is here too. It will be her lecture. I will send you exactly the name of the lecture. And Slavimir is writing, thanks, Leah. Thank you. And it's really wonderful to see you all during our forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much again.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.